Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of Charlotte Mecklenburg History with Dan Morrill. I am Dan's daughter, Mary Dana, and I am here today with Dan, thanks to Zoom. Hello, Dad.
I'm here.
How are you doing?
Zoom.
Oh, thanks for being with us today. And for those of you who have just started joining us, my dad, Dan Morrill, Dr. Dan Morrill, is a retired professor of history from UNCC. He also is the former director of the Historic Landmarks Commission. He retired from that in January. He's also an author, and he's won many awards. So, including he was inducted into the Order of the Longleaf Pine. So that one's especially impressive, Dad. So
You're very kind. Very kind.
And then today is, let's see, it is Sunday, May 3rd, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to be talking about Jack Pentes today. Last week, now I have to tell you, Dad, last week, you put me on the spot. I did not know that you were going to be asking me all those questions.
I'm going to do it again today.
I was not prepared. I felt like...
I love your not being prepared.
I felt like I was in one of your classes, back at UNCC, and that I had not studied. That I had not studied for your class.
I forgive you for anything. You just add much spice to an otherwise dull operation.
I don't know about that. So anyway, but I'll do what I can. So
Okay.
Also, okay, now we're recording this to be able to put on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to try today sharing the screen at the end, and then we'll see some pictures that you have.
Right.
Right. So
right.
Make sure I have that setting done. But okay, so take it away there, Dad, with Jack Pentes.
Well, it's really going to be tough because Jack Pentes, Pentes, born in 1931. He died in 2015. I remember, I think I talked to him on the telephone a couple of times. I never met Jack Pentes, but I am definitely the lesser for it because Jack was obviously a just incredible human being. In fact, whenever I put up a picture of him or sent out a text message about him, I always get basically two things back. One is that he was the most creative person that they ever met. A man named Charlie Pittman, who worked with Jack at WBTV in the production department in the 1970s, told me that. In fact, as a result of the fact that last week I said I was going to be talking about Jack Pentes, I got an instant message today from someone who said that same thing, said Jack was the most creative person that he ever met. So that's one thing. The other thing I've always heard about him was that he was the youngest old man that they ever met. In other words, really in many ways, Jack throughout his whole life was wonderfully inventive, wonderfully creative, almost like a child. He never worried about risking anything. He had bold, dramatic ideas. He was just an absolutely fantastic human being. And, there are so many people, Mary Dana, are just pains in the neck. Not all of them, but some people, mopey, dopey. He was just a joy. He was a joy. Everybody said that he was just an incredible joy. He was definitely, to use an esoteric word, He was an iconoclast. He was a rebel. Put it another way, he was a little bit off frequency, but that made him so wonderful. And in many ways, Jack was the personification of the American dream. You know, you think about what the American dream is, Mary Diana, it's you ought to be able, regardless of your race, your gender, your ethnicity, you ought to be able to achieve as much as your talents and abilities and your willingness to work will take you. I mean, that is the American dream. This is the land of opportunity. Government's supposed to leave you alone, be creative and be spontaneous. And that's exactly what he did. When he graduated from Charlotte Central High School, which he did in 1949, he had absolutely, well, first of all, he didn't have the means to go to college. He had about $300 to his name. His daddy was not a man of great wealth. He didn't have a lot of money. But also, Jack said that he always despised school. And, you know, I think one of my favorite books, if anybody's ever been enough of a nerd as I am, to read Hermann Hesse. Hesse wrote a book called Beneath the Wheel. And that was the image of the education system. It's like a big old wheel and it just rolls over the top of you. And it squeezes all your creativity out of you and makes you conform. And the reality is, regardless of how you feel about schools, and I certainly laud school teachers, it is true that school is particularly a challenge for people who are just, for lack of a better word, a little bit off frequency, and he definitely was. He was a Greek. He was the son of a Greek immigrant. His father was born on the island of Patmos. Now, Patmos. Now, many people might not realize this, but you know, much of Greece is islands. And Patmos is a very famous island because supposedly that's where John wrote the book of Revelations that's in the Bible. But that's where his father was from. His father immigrated to the United States after World War I, the 1920s, and he went to Alabama, a little town called Opelika. And I mean, it's you know, what do Greeks do? A lot of them go in the restaurant business, don't they? Do they, Mary?
Yeah, that is true.
Don't they go in the meat and two vegetables?
Yes.
Well, his daddy started out in Opelika with nothing. And he first thing he put up was a fruit stand in an alley. Then he got restaurants. He moved to Columbus, Georgia, which is very close by. Opelika is in southeastern Alabama. And he started being very successful as a restaurant man. But his father had some challenges, Mary Dinah. You remember last week we talked about prohibition.
Yes, I do.
Do you remember that one of the things that Frank McNinch was concerned about were the impact of alcohol?
Yeah. Yes.
Remember that?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, Jack Pentes' daddy became an alcoholic.
Mm.
In fact, if you look up where Jack Pentes was born in 1931, it says he was born in Dothan, Alabama, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
But his mama happened to be in Dothan because his daddy was there to be treated for alcoholism. So he had no real long ties. He really grew up, Jack did, as a child in Columbus, Georgia. But his daddy got in a little trouble with the law because he was selling some booze out of his restaurant, which was illegal, and the police closed down his restaurant. And he had to move, and he moved to Charlotte, came to Charlotte. He came to Charlotte in, you know, when Jack was a little boy. And Jack was born in 1931. Mr. Pentes moved to Charlotte in the mid-1930s, became a cook at a diner, restaurant, whatever, on East Trade Street. So Jack did not come from wealth and money whatsoever, but he was determined that if his daddy didn't fulfill the American dream, he was going to fulfill the American dream. Mm-hmm. Now, the money, he had about $300 when he graduated from high school, which he had earned primarily being a soda jerk.
Okay.
While he was in high school, he would go up to the Walgreens drugstore after school and jerk sodas. And so here's this guy, he never took a single art class. He never took a single design class whatsoever, none. But he had an innate ability to draw. His favorite thing to draw, by the way, and this will appeal to you since you're such a fan of Disney World, his favorite thing to draw was Mickey Mouse.
Ah, okay.
In fact, Jack had a huge Mickey Mouse collection. Well, here he is, graduating from high school in 1931, has no connections in the community whatsoever. I mean, he graduated in 1949, excuse me. He had no connections in the community whatsoever. And he sets out on his own. He's determined that he's going to be a graphic artist and a designer. Even though he has no education, he has no training whatsoever. He started out basically making signs for stores. Mm-hmm. You know, buy your shirts here, whatever. You know, he illustrated some books because the guy could draw. He also was, you know, he did what he called chalk talks. C-H-A-L-K, chalk, talks, mm-hmm. T-A-L-K-S. And what he had was a little portable blackboard that he could draw on. And he would go to kids' birthday parties. And he'd talk to them about, say, I don't know, Mickey Mouse. And he'd draw Mickey Mouse.
Right.
And he'd draw Donald Duck. Or he'd go to the Nature Museum and he'd give talks about butterflies. You know, butterflies are pretty big at the Nature Museum. And yeah. he'd draw butterflies. So, you know, he was just scrounging around trying to find a way to make money. And he did he was really just living and he was living at home. You know, he was just trying to survive, trying to make it. Well, one of the things he seized upon that was to be a real big factor in his eventual success, he decided to become a clown. Now, you know, it's interesting about clowns. Clowns can be funny. Sometimes they're scary. In fact, what's this movie they just had, The Joker? Is that the name of it?
Yeah, yeah.
That's kind of ruined clowns, you know. Well, that's got to be one of the
they've been ruined.
Saddest, lousiest human beings I ever saw in that movie. Anyway, but he became a clown, and he named himself. This guy is so imaginative. He's so imaginative. By the way, he named the clown Bobo. B-O-B-O, Bobo.
Okay.
And he would go to his birthday parties, and he would be a clown. And he'd do his chalk talk. Or he'd go sit outside a store. And, you know, when people would come up, he'd be out there, attract them into the store. You've seen these people that stand out in these goofy costumes trying to get you to go to a car wash or whatever. Sure. Well, he did that kind of thing. I mean, my phone's ringing. I'm going to put it over there. Anyway, he did everything in the world he could just to, you know, try to make money, try to put things together. Mm-hmm. Well, Bobo was a pretty big hit. Bobo was also a hit in Korea because Jack went in the United States Army. He was drafted. That's back when they
Yeah,
still
we
drafted.
had the draft, right?
Don't have that anymore. It's a big factor. But anyway, and he was in Korea from 1954 until 1956. And one of the things that he did over there, he got a man, a Korean artisan, to make him some big shoes for Bobo. So he was even thinking about Bobo when he was in Korea. Well, in 1956, he came back to Charlotte and continued his just frenetic energy. The guy was a workaholic. He was a locomotive in trousers, I mean, just working all the time. Go, 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 go. He also made some logos. He did the logo, for example, for the festival in the park.
Oh, is it the one they still use?
It is the one.
How interesting. Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
He did the logo for the mascot for the Charlotte College basketball team. Now, somebody knows I'm so blooming old. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I came to Charlotte College in 1963, and I remember going to basketball games, and they, had this miner with a big hat. Well, that was Jack.
You mean that UNCC 49er
No,
logo?
well, that's gone. That's UNCC. This was Charlotte College, so it was even earlier. They don't use that logo anymore.
Oh, okay.
But he was just struggling. He was working like a pig, and just nonstop work. Well, a big event of monumental proportions happened to Jack in July 1957. He got married. Now, he married, and then his wife was as big a factor in Jack's success as Jack was. Because Jack himself said he was very creative with ideas, but he wasn't worth, what, with money. I mean, he wasn't a real shrewd businessman.
No, he was like an idea man.
Yeah. Well, his wife was Ruth Emerson Jones. Now, she was born in 1933. Now, she still lives, and I've talked to her recently. Wonderful person. Golly, I had a telephone conversation with her. It was just terrific. Well, she had known him at Charlotte Central High School. Back in the days of segregation, there were only two high schools in Charlotte for white kids. There was Harding and there was Charlotte Central. And those schools were very, very different in those days. You went to West Charlotte, right?
I did.
And West Charlotte was, I don't think you probably formed a lot of lasting, enduring friendships from West Charlotte.
No, that's not true.
Okay. All right. I stand corrected. But these schools, everybody who was anybody went to Charlotte Central High School.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, Ruth has real good people skills. She was, and Jack did too. People loved Jack. Jack was bubbly, full of ideas, but Ruth was shrewd, business person.
Okay.
And therefore, she really went to work for Jack. And she was the one that would keep the books, would write the checks. She was the one that was really the business side of what happened.
Right.
And it's interesting how they met. One of the interesting things is how do men and women meet? Well, remember I told you he was a soda jerk?
Yes.
Well, there was a guy named Victor Jones who happened to be Ruth's daddy.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a big somebody. I mean, he was a vice president of public relations for what's Bank of America now. I think it was American Trust Company, or I don't know what they called it then. But Victor Jones went by Walgreens drugstore to get a milkshake.
Okay.
And he got to meet Jack. And Jack impressed him. And he had Jack do a Christmas display for the bank simply because he thought Jack was talented. And Jack was incredibly talented. So creative, so imaginative. Well, Ruth was working at the YWCA. She needed a Christmas decoration.
Okay.
And Victor told her, well, I met this soda jerk up at Walgreens, and I think he'd do a good job for you. And that's how the two of them met. I mean, they had known each other at Central, but she was 2 years behind him. And you know, in high school, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So they got married, and they stayed married, and they were still married when he died in 2015. And she's a wonderful person. But she was a very big factor. Well, let me keep going. I got so much to say. Well, he was a rebel. One of the things he did in 1958, you know, Charlotte's kind of buttoned down, uptight.
Banking town.
Banking town. All banking towns are boring, right? Okay. Well, Jack was so inventive. In 1958, he did a mural. Now, I've never seen a photograph of it. I'd love to find it. If somebody out there knows, got a picture, I'd love to see it. Esso, Standard Oil, used to have an office building right across Wendover from Parkway Shopping Center. He did a mural for them in 1958. And you know what most Charlotte artists were painting? Landscapes, seascapes, you know, historic buildings, you know, where he didn't use a single brush in that mural. He used basically paint rollers and squeeze bottles. He'd get squeeze bottles that held barbecue sauce. He'd squeeze all the barbecue sauce out of the squeeze bottles, wash them out, put paint in there. And so the mural was him rolling paint and squeezing squeeze bottles up on the canvas. And of course, Charlotte, the art establishment in Charlotte was aghast.
Well, that's like Jackson Pollock, right? You know,
Yeah,
Jackson Pollock.
He was just wonderfully creative. Well, he still, though, he had a hard time making money, even with Ruth there, because she understood. He did a lot of sets for productions at Ovens Auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
He did a lot of Christmas displays for shopping malls and shopping centers. And all of these were custom made. They were made for one purpose, one event, one place. And they were very expensive to build, very time consuming. And therefore, Jack was getting a lot of publicity and people recognized him as somebody that was important, but he wasn't making very much money.
Mm-hmm.
But Bobo was doing okay.
Right.
Bobo became somewhat of a community icon. And there was a television program. This would have been even think before your time because you were born in 1970.
That's correct.
But there used to be a program on WBTV. It had a person, the person who hosted it, his name was Big Bill Ward.
Okay.
And Bobo appeared on the program a lot with Big Bill Ward.
What year?
A lot of people got to see him, you know.
What years? What years were?
You're talking about basically the 1960s, mainly the 1960s.
Okay.
And then maybe in the early 1970s, but it would have been in that period. But he got a lot of publicity, but he wasn't really making very much money. And as far as where Ruth and Jack lived, Now, they had two children, a boy and a girl. They both still live. I've talked to both of them. They were both very kind, very wonderful, very much like their daddy in the sense of being sort of creative thinkers. In fact, his daughter was at one time was in a rock band.
Oh, okay, great.
And the son is a producer of videos, and they're both very, very talented, very capable, very able people. But they lived in apartments. But I tell you, one street you ought to go down. It's one of the most interesting streets in Charlotte. It starts out being as boring as hash, but if you drive down, it becomes very interesting. Sharon Hills Road.
Okay.
And it's off of Park Road, but that's where Victor Jones, who was the father of Ruth Jones, it was Jack's father-in-law. He lived in it is really an interesting place. I mean, it's got Victor Jones had bought an old hunting lodge, added to it. It's a big log house, built a lake, and Jack and Ruth were able to build a house on that property, an A-frame house. You know what an A-frame house is?
Yes.
Well, I'll show, if the pictures work later, I'll show you a picture.
Okay.
But they moved there in 1969. But they didn't have much money. 1970 was a big year. Do you know who Grover Robbins was? You ever heard that name?
No.
Well, Grover Robbins was the man who was primarily responsible for Tweetsie.
Oh, okay.
You ever heard of Tweetsie?
I have heard.
Yeah.
I've been to Tweetsie. I've been
Grover
there.
Robbins thought that he could make the mountains around Boone a major tourist attraction. And one of those was, of course, Tweetsie. Now, Grover Robbins knew about Jack because Jack had been on Big Bill Ward's show as Bobo the Clown.
Okay.
So Grover Robbins had Jack did a lot of the stuff at Tweetsie. There's a mouse mine up there, mouse mine, Mickey Mouse.
Yes, yes, I've seen that.
It was designed by Jack Pentes.
Oh, it was?
Yes. So Grover Robbins knew Jack Pentes. Well, Grover had developed Beach Mountain as a ski resort. Well, they squirt this water out there and makes this fake snow and so forth. You're not going to have a big season for a ski resort in North Carolina, for God's sake.
Right. Too hot.
So Grover Robbins came up with this idea. How can I make Beach Mountain a year-round tourist attraction? And he said, maybe we could put something up on the top of that mountain where they've already got the ski lifts going up, and they'd go up there in the summertime. So guess who he asked to go up there and walk on the top of the mountain with him?
Jack Pentes.
Old Jack Pentes, because he knew Jack through Bobo on Bill Ward's show. Now, this was all 1969, 68, 69,
Right.
70. And he told Grover Robbins, told Jack, "There's only one thing I want you to do. I want you to preserve as much of this land as you want to, but what are you going to put up on this mountain somebody wants to see?" Well, Jack, being the creative guy that he was, said, "The Wizard of Oz." He was going to, the Cowardly Lion and the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and Dorothy's house and, the whole schmear, the witch of whatever. He was going to make it into, can you imagine anything more audacious?
The witch of whatever. It's the Wicked Witch of the West.
Whatever. I'm not into the land. Anyway, well, Can you imagine anything more audacious than coming up with that idea? I mean, this guy, you talk about bold.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about bold. Now, this guy was incredibly bold. So he designed, and that made him some money. That's really what allowed him to build that house up there on Sharon Hills Road in 1969, because he was already under contract to do the Land of Oz, and it opened in 1970. And you know who Debbie Reynolds was?
Of course, I do know who Debbie Reynolds is.
Well, you'd be amazed how many people out there don't know who Debbie Reynolds. Well, she came to formally open a brick road and all that business in 1970. And by the way, Jack wanted to put a very fancy park patterned after Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen, Denmark. He wanted to do that in First Ward between McDowell Street and Little Sugar Creek, but the city wouldn't do it. I mean, he was too bold. And by the way, Jack never had a great deal of patience with politicians. He was at heart really a libertarian. I mean, he didn't like government. He didn't like regulations. He didn't like to be constrained. And if you go back and look at him in the 1970s, when things are getting a little bit better, he starts really rattling the cages of Charlotte's elite. I mean, he became a big environmentalist. You know, a lot of these young people think they're the first ones to be environmental. Well, it was a big environmental movement in the 1970s.
70s, I remember.
Earth Day. Also, Jack was a big supporter of greenways. He was very concerned about pollution and really went after Duke Power. You don't go after Duke Power in Charlotte. About being slow and abandoning coal-fired power plants. He even thought that people ought to ride bicycles to work, and he organized rallies. This is all in the early 1970s. He organized rallies where people would ride their bikes down 4th Street to go to uptown Charlotte. I mean, he was really big before his time. One of his huge issues, too, there's a road in Charlotte called Sharon Lane. You drive down Sharon Lane all the time.
I did.
Well, there used to be trees on either side of Sharon Lane. And in 1971, John Belk, who was in the mayor, said they're going to cut all the trees down, make that a 4-lane road so people get South Park faster.
Yeah.
And Jack had a hissy. He said, this is a perfect example of the madness of modern America, that they think they're going to solve their traffic problems by adding more lanes to roads and cutting down these beautiful trees. And he said, if necessary, he would chain himself to a tree rather than let them be torn down. Well, he lost. They did chop them all down in 1972. So he was a bit of a rascal. I mean, he's a bit of a rascal, but he always brought smiles out in people's faces. He wasn't a mean rascal because he was just a passionate man. Think about the people that are really the happiest. I think the happiest people are people who have two things. They love their work. You know how many people go to work and they hate it? They just do it for the fringe benefits. I mean, they just hate it. You know how many? He loved his work. And if you love your work, it's not work.
Right. Well, like you love your work.
I do like what I do.
Okay, so what's the second thing?
And the second thing is to have at least one human being in your life that you can thoroughly and completely trust.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Jack had that because of Ruth.
Right.
And by the way, she came from a very prestigious family. Now, I'll tell you something else. Mary Dana, I imagine on the issue of abortion, which is obviously a huge I, I imagine you're pro-choice, aren't you?
Dad, I am not going to talk about
Okay,
politics.
well, I'll tell you. I'm bringing out
Why are you talking
Jack.
about? What does
Jack
this
was
have to take
big
a
time.
hard
He
left,
he
right turn,
he
whatever?
he was big time pro-choice.
Okay.
He thought a woman ought to be able to have an abortion legally and safely, right? That was his big point. Well, I bring that up because there was a woman named Anita Bryant. Now, I bet you don't know who Anita Bryant was. She sang songs.
I've heard of her.
She was a big anti-abortion person.
I've heard of her.
And she was going to give a sermon up at Northside Baptist Church, which was a very conservative Baptist church at the time. And Dorn, who was the son of Jack, went up there, and the police were very concerned about the fact that he had a cream pie with him. And he was afraid. The police were afraid that Dorn would put a cream. Anyway, he had to leave. But in any case, he is an amazing person.
And
Now,
then, and what? So, and no, we need to start wrapping things up here.
how long has it been going?
Like 35 minutes.
Well, I can't stop.
No, I know, but
Well, I could say something. Let's show the pictures.
all right,
okay?
yeah, show the and aren't you guys trying to save his house?
Well, yes, I'm always trying to save something. Now I'm gonna go here now. If we have to, not wait a minute, hold on. If we have to just wait, we might have to wait, Mary Dana. Hold a minute. I'm trying to go to my.
Can you see my screen?
I can, but I can't do it on your screen.
No, I know. I don't mean to be doing that.
Well,
hold on.
Then let me go back.
Stop share. Can you share your screen?
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna try to do. If you'll just hold on a minute, but you see. Okay. Well, it's not working, Mary Dana. It's not working.
Okay.
I'm just.
I will just edit that part out.
Well, let me say a couple more things then, since I got some time, right? How much time?
No, you could. That's about. I mean, Dad, come on now. By the way, you can follow. People can follow you on Instagram.
His funeral in 2015, they said it's the best funeral anybody ever had. He had clowns there. Clowns. He had a band. Tremendous. He got him a boat. He got some money. He developed soft playgrounds for fast food restaurants like Burger King.
Yeah,
and that really changed.
He did
that's all I
can
say, Paula. That's all I can say. So be it. I can't say anymore.
Okay. So, thanks for joining us this week. And you can talk about him again sometime if you want to. But do you know what you're going to talk about next week?
No idea.
All right. Well, we'll figure it out next week. All right. Well, thanks for being here. And all right. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.